Andrew Pearce on LBC.
We are going to carry on talking about the £400, but first I want to talk to you about an extraordinary story, the infected blood scandal, and that's what it was. Families are now to be given compensation. More than 4,000 surviving victims of the contaminated blood scandal will receive provisional compensation of £100,000 each. The chairman of the Infected Blood Inquiry, Sir Brian Langstaff, said there was a compelling case to make the payments quickly. You can say that again. 2,400 people at least died after contracting HIV or hepatitis C through NHS treatments in the 70s and 80s. The government said it would urgently consider any recommendations on compensation. Giving evidence in 2021, the then Health Secretary Matt Hancock, remember him, said of course compensation would be paid to victims and their families if the inquiry formally called for it. Currently, victims and their families get an annual financial support payment, but they've not been compensated for things like loss of earnings, care costs and other lifetime losses. I'm going to speak now to Carol Ann Grayson. Carol Ann's husband was one of the victims involved in this scandal, who sadly passed away in 2005. Carol Ann, good evening to you.
Good evening, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
No, you're very welcome. This has been far too long, hasn't it?
It has. There's been delay after delay, and the irony is that the evidence that's now being used by the inquiry was available 25 years ago, and every attempt and every meeting we had with ministers, they blocked the evidence.
Now, what was that evidence essentially, Carol Ann?
Well, the evidence showed serious safety violations in the collecting of blood. For example, my husband's treatment came from Arkansas State Penitentiary.
Good Lord.
And basically the prisoners themselves were doing the admin paperwork for the programme. And if a prisoner was glowing yellow with hepatitis, they would falsify the name using the Arkansas telephone directory.
Good Lord. And that's the blood your husband was given?
That's what he was given on the NHS in Newcastle, yeah.
And why did he need blood, Carol? Carol Ann, what was his health issue?
He had a condition called Hemophilia, which is hereditary.
Right.
And it basically means that his blood doesn't clot properly like yours or mine would.
Yeah. And so he was given was this like a regular transfusion?
Yes, for him, he would take it 3 times a week. It's a dried powder you mix with water and you inject it into the vein,
right.
And that helps your blood to clot. And
how quickly did he become sick?
Well, from the first time he had the American products, we now know that almost everyone was infected with hepatitis from their first shot of the American treatment. And that's because we went from a treatment for volunteer donors in the UK, very small numbers, to huge plasma pools of up to 400,000 donors, of the highest risk donors. So it would have been almost impossible not to be infected every time you took a shot of treatment.
And did you, when your husband took this powder, did you know where it had come from?
No, he had no idea. And when he did start to have concerns and raised it, when he saw an old documentary on the television and raised it with his doctors, he was told, don't worry, Peter, it's not coming from those sources anymore. And when he was first introduced to the treatment as a young teenage boy, he was still a boy when he went on to this treatment, there was a letter from the doctor and it said, nothing but good can come from this treatment.
How long was he sick for, Carol Ann?
Years.
Was he?
I mean, I literally nursed him for a couple of decades.
Was he able to go to work? Was he housebound in the end? What was it? How bad did it get?
He couldn't go to work. He had well, if I just explain, he was infected with HIV, hepatitis B, C, G, D, and exposed to new variant CJD, which is mad cow's disease.
Good Lord.
So he was very weak. He had infection after infection because in the early days, of course, there was no treatment for HIV.
No, there wasn't. And you died.
Exactly. And when he was assessed for a liver transplant for the hepatitis, they said they couldn't give him one because he would have to be on immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of his life, which as somebody with HIV would have been, very problematic.
Yeah. So he wasn't able to work. So loss of income. You lost him in 2005, 17 years ago. Did he die at home with you, Carol Ann, or did he have to go into hospital in the end?
He was at home with me until literally weeks before he died, and then he broke his hip. And because we were in a first floor flat, I could no longer. I'd nursed him for 2 decades. I then moved into the hospice and carried on looking after him with the nurses at the hospice. But I used to be a nursing sister, and I had to give up my career to care for him. So
no income coming in at all, apart from
just
benefits
what we got from the state
and
from a trust, an ex gratia monthly payment from a trust when it should have paid compensation in 1991. But in 1991, the documents that were supposed to be seen in court, basically they never made it to court because the government decided to give this small ex gratia payment to stop the documents being seen in court. And these are a lot of the documents that are now being seen at the inquiry 30 years on.
So effectively, it was a small ex gratia payment to effect a cover-up.
Exactly.
And, yes. And John Major, who was Prime Minister at the time, made a completely facetious remark. What did he say to the inquiry? Bad luck or something?
Yes, they're basically suggesting it had happened because of bad luck, when it had happened through dreadful choices.
Yeah.
We had one of the best blood systems in the world, unpaid volunteer donors, very well screened, to accessing plasma from Skid Row clinics in Central South America, from prisons, from the worst possible sources. And I don't blame the donors, I blame the people that set up the systems.
Yeah. Are you bitter, Carol Ann? You lost your husband. It was a terrible 2 decades. What emotion would you to describe your state of mind about this? After all this time, you're finally going to get some compensation. It's an interim payment of £100,000, but you will have lost far more than that in 2 incomes over 20 years.
Oh, totally, yes. I would have been, I'm very well qualified, and I would have been on a very high income, as my sister is. She's just retired. So you lose your sense of self as well, when you lose your career. And, I was intensely angry because when someone does something wrong, you hope that they're going to put their hand up and say, OK, we made terrible mistakes and now we can't put it right, but we can at least make your life more comfortable. But no, when we saw, I accessed many of the documents a long time ago, and we started to see what the government was saying and their line to take of how they were going to ignore the fight for compensation and block us at every opportunity. I actually did, when my husband died, I went to university and wrote a dissertation on this, and I won 2 top awards. One, ironically, in the name of a government official. And still, they, every time we met them, they wouldn't minute the meetings, or they would refuse to meet us most of the time. And of course, if you don't acknowledge the evidence, then you don't have to do anything about it. And that's the position we were in for 30 years.
It's an absolute scandal, Carol Ann.
Well, it's classed as the worst medical treatment disaster in the history of the NHS.
Yeah.
And yes, as Andy Burnham said, who gave evidence the other day, former health minister, a huge scandal. It's a massive cover-up.
Do you know what money that you're getting, and not that can ever bring your husband back?
I don't. I know I'll get the interim, as a bereaved partner, I'll get the interim 100,000. Obviously, there'll be a claim in the name of my husband and myself, and our children also will have a claim, and parents will have a claim.
Yeah.
But not everybody will be getting the interim payment at the same time. And I think that's due to the fact that Sir Brian, and I welcome his recommendations.
Yeah.
He's looking, I think, at the people who are now an older generation and don't have time on the side.
No.
Both infected and affected, and now have a lot of health issues.
Yeah, and your husband's one of 2,400 people who died.
It's actually over 3,000
Is it
now.
really?
And he also lost his brother, who was 20 when he died.
No.
He was a haemophiliac and died of AIDS in one of the first in 1986.
As a result of infected blood that he was given?
Yes, he was a haemophiliac. And then my father-in-law died 2 years after he collapsed of a heart attack campaigning with the stress. You know, because he had one son that had died in horrific circumstances, and then my husband, his other eldest son, in very, very poor health and expected to die.
What a terrible toll on your family.
Well, I'm the only one left. Yeah. It's
Caroline.
very hot.
Of course it is, Caroline. Look, you've got some form of victory. I hope it doesn't seem too Pyrrhic a victory, but at last it's been recognised, and John Major, I'm told, is, if he hasn't apologised, is going to apologise for that completely stupid thing he said in the inquiry. And Caroline, can we keep in touch with you, because we want to make sure that they don't do the dirty on you, because you've been fighting this for far too long.
We have, and we will continue to keep them on their toes. And thank you so much for letting me come on and speak.
And thank you for being so brave. And we're so sorry about your husband and your brother-in-law and your father-in-law, Caroline. It's just been brutal for your family. Caroline Grayson, talking about the contaminated blood scandal, which she says, and it has been said, one of the worst scandals in the history of the NHS. Over 3,000 dead. Terrible deaths too. If you remember how awful people who died of AIDS in the 1980s was, there was no cure, and it was a pretty terrible way to go. People just anyway. Caroline talking about her own husband, Peter, who she lost, but she gets the first stage of her compensation, £100,000. 2 jobs, 2 careers destroyed over 20 years. £100,000 doesn't touch the surface, does it?